Exactly. All right, we'll start with I have two scripture readings, both from the Gospel of Matthew, which basically is the starting point for, it's Jesus' teaching about divorce. Would somebody like to read the first one, Matthew chapter 5?
I'll do it.
Okay.
It was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate for a divorce. Deuteronomy 24, 1-4. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery.
Okay. And would someone else like to read chapter 19, apart from chapter 19? You'd like to do it? Sure.
Now when Jesus had finished these sayings, he went away from Galilee and entered the region of Judea beyond the Jordan, and large crowds followed him, and he healed them there. And Pharisees came up to him and tested him by asking, "Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause?" He answered, "Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate." They said to him, "Why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and send her away?" He said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another, commits adultery."
Okay. So these are the words of Jesus as given to us in the gospel. And it's a good news, bad news situation, right? Let's get the bad news out of the way, and we can spend the rest of the time talking about the good news. You will find this is not just a Catholic understanding, right? Even Protestant scholars that I have studied, they all agree that what Jesus is saying, particularly in Matthew chapter 5, the first one that we read, that yes, divorce may happen for various reasons, all sorts of reasons that people get divorced. But once that happens, you may not remarry. That's what he said. That's what everybody says. That's what Protestants, Catholics, Orthodox, you name it. That's what the text truly says, what Jesus said. And Jesus is God. We have to, hi Naomi, Jesus is God. And no human authority can change the words of Jesus, right? That's... Are you here thinking this is RCIA?
No.
No, okay.
I came to learn.
Oh, good. This is Naomi. We had introductions.
Hi.
Like your haircut.
Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah, it's adorable.
it looks nurse-like.
It is. It works really well.
And that's because Naomi is a nurse.
Yeah.
So, those are harsh words, right? This is what Jesus said. He said, once you get married, if you get divorced, you cannot remarry.
Didn't Paul concur with that?
Didn't
Paul?
Oh yeah, because that's what Jesus said. Right? So that's the bad news, if you like. Yeah. The good news is, okay, Jesus did also give authority to the church to teach in his name. Right? He said to Peter very clearly that he did that. And so we get to ask, okay, what do we do here? Do we just pack up and go home? Because if you're divorced, you cannot be remarried because Jesus said so? Or do we ask ourselves, well, what did Jesus mean by marriage? That's the big question. Is marriage regardless? If two 18-year-olds, hey, you know what? Let's run away from home and go to Las Vegas and we get stoned, and just for fun, let's go to the Elvis Chapel and get married. That'll be cool. Is that a marriage? if someone thought that the person they're marrying was going to medical school and they said, this is going to be a brain surgeon, this is going to be a good life, but then he decides not to go to medical school and they get a divorce. Was that a marriage? There's lots of questions about what do we mean, what could Jesus have meant by marriage? So, on your handout there, just to kind of stay on. Oh, and I could mention this business about the two, what they call the exception clause, right? That's very difficult to translate. On Matthew chapter 5, it says, except on the grounds of sexual immorality. And in Matthew chapter 19, that last sentence there, except for sexual immorality. What does that mean? The word that Jesus used, that the descriptive Gospels originally come to us in Greek. And the Greek word there is porneia. That's where we get the word pornography from. But the problem is porneia in Greek has a very broad range of meaning. It could mean sexual immorality of some sort, it could mean pornography, it could mean adultery, it could mean flirting, it could mean prostitution, it could mean any kind of deviant sexual behavior. So it's very unclear as to, did Jesus have anything particular in mind there about what he meant by porneia, what kind of porneia. It's not clear. We could talk around the background of this text, but maybe we'll save that for another time. So, what we believe, the church believes and proclaims the message of Jesus Christ, that Christian marriage is permanent and lasting. You get married for life. What God has joined together, no human has the authority to separate. Those words are beautiful, but as probably most, not all, but most in this room know, they're also very challenging. Also very, very clear. They reveal the permanence of marriage. That's great when it happens, but challenging because marriage can be tough. It's clear in that Jesus is unambiguous in what he says. But as I said, the church has been given authority by Christ himself and understand that problems can exist in a person's capacity to give consent. Right? What makes a marriage, as far as we're concerned, is consent. You have to freely consent to marry the person you're marrying. In a marriage ceremony, in a Catholic church, the bride and the groom get up and express their consent to each other. That makes the marriage. It's not any sort of anything else, okay? That consent makes the marriage. If consent is lacking, then there was no marriage, right? Marriage did not arise. If, someone is marrying somebody, you're expressing to get married for life. But you're thinking, I'm going to get married until, then I can get my green card, and then we'll go my separate ways. Is that consent? Consent is lacking. You see, there's a lot of things that a valid Christian marriage, if you're truly validly married, so to speak, it is absolutely unbreakable by any power on earth. If certain problems can be proven, then a marriage might be declared to be invalid from the beginning. So, hello. Hi, Kathleen.
Hello,
Oh, good.
Yeah, what's your?
Here, if you could just get that.
Well, good. I'm ready.
The chair there.
Put it all in.
This is Kathleen, and she is not a pharmacist.
No, I'm not a pharmacist, but I'm a mom, you see.
Shall I bring a better chairs, You see, these are school children's chairs. They are
Well, it's up to you. I mean, I'm
Would you like more comfortable chairs? Maybe, huh?
Oh, I'm fine.
You're okay?
fine now.
Really?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay, you sure? Okay.
Actually, I find those chairs less comfortable than these, but that's me.
Thank you so much. I want to be in front of you. Thank you, sir.
So this is
Some of
Kathleen.
these left around?
Yeah.
pass those down to me.
Oh, we did.
She didn't get one yet.
Yes, she does.
I think I got one.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
So really, before we could talk about what marriage isn't, I used to go to St. Francis High School at one point. They asked me to come to talk to the students. Nobody was married, of course. These were even freshmen, some of them, to talk to the theology classes about annulment. And I spent 90% of the time talking about marriage. Because once you understand what marriage is, then it's easier to understand what it isn't, okay, and when it's not, okay. So I simply went to the Catechism of the Catholic Church for our, if you want to call it, our understanding, let's say. I was going to say definition. Definition is not a good word. Our understanding of marriage. It starts out by saying matrimonial covenant. I highlighted that word covenant. Don't ever say marriage is a contract, okay? Marriage is not a contract. A contract is an agreement between two parties with terms. If somebody breaks the terms of the agreement, the contract is null and void, right? You paid somebody to put a roof on your house. He doesn't put the roof, or he does a sloppy job, you don't pay him. The contract is null and void. And Andy, as a judge, he could tell us that if it went to court, that's what happened. I paid you to put a roof on my house, and you didn't put a roof on my house, therefore I'm not going to pay you. And so you have not. That's not, that's a contract. That's not a covenant. I don't know how you understand a covenant. Covenant is two people coming together forming a family bond. Okay? There's a total sharing of the two. The weaker person gets to share in the strength of the stronger one. And between the two, there is one will. The two become one. Jesus said, two become one flesh. Or God said, two become one flesh. One heart, one mind, one will, moving forward now in life.
You could say a contract is an exchange of things, and a covenant is an exchange of persons.
And so, right there, that's that word covenant. Never call marriage a contract. The matrimonial covenant by which a man and a woman, again today, there's all sorts of crazy stuff out there about people, not only two women or two men marrying, but, I'm surprised we're not marrying Cocker Spaniels to,
That's coming.
That's coming. It's coming. A man and a woman, no exception to that. Establish between themselves a partnership of the whole of life. Not just this, compartmentalized part, the whole of life, everything, and by its nature is ordered to the good of the spouses, right? So you love each other, you want to help each other grow in every way, including spiritually, and there's an and there, and there's something else, what we call the two goods of marriage, the procreation and education of offspring or children. Okay? The intention of marriage is for the couple who love each other to support each other and to produce children. So you could see for consent and intention, I know many people who said, there's enough people in the world. I'm not bringing in any more children. I went and had a vasectomy, so we don't. No, that's not a marriage. Further, the covenant between baptized persons has been raised by Christ the Lord to the dignity of a sacrament, a divinely instituted, charism, a divinely instituted thing, Christ Himself, and yeah.
So if you can't have kids, do you have to adopt?
No.
Okay, that's my question.
No. You have to refuse to have, whether you can or you can't. Some people can have their own children, but you have the potentiality. If you could perform the sexual act, God could do whatever God wants to do. We have plenty of examples in Scripture of Hannah, for example, or Sarah, Abraham's wife, or Elizabeth, not Elizabeth, but Elizabeth. All these women were barren, and yet they conceived. Okay, so the potentiality has to be there. Okay. If you refuse, if you say no, I don't want you.
That's a different story.
It's a different story, right? Or if you find out the inability to have children, if you're like that, has to be antecedent to the marriage. Technically, you can't know if you're capable of having children until you're married, because you can't have sex until you're married. And then you finding you can't conceive, and you realize, well, there's a problem with either the husband or the wife. That's not your fault, right? God could work through that, so that's not a problem. It's people who intentionally sterilize themselves, make themselves, or simply, I refuse to have children. Okay, that's what that means. So that's an important question. Okay. And it's been raised to the dignity of a sacrament. This is where most people, I was talking to somebody Friday, they said, well, if you're not Catholic and you don't believe marriage is a sacrament, then you don't need to know. Yes, you do. Two baptized persons, if the two people are baptized, doesn't matter what church you're baptized in. If it's a valid baptism, the marriage between two baptized persons is a sacrament. And the Catholic Church recognizes that marriage. The canonical, the legal expression is that marriage enjoys the favor of the law. If two people come in and say we're married, they're married. Okay? And it's only when the marriage is called into question that it now begins to be investigated. Was the marriage a marriage? Okay? And this, as I say, this applies to all marriages, not just Catholic marriages. So two Baptists come in, they're married, sacramentally married, even though Baptists don't recognize marriage as a sacrament. Okay, so the fundamentals here: marriage is a natural, divinely ordained institution. The Church believes this is true regardless of time, culture, religion, philosophy, even if the spouses have no religion. Two atheists say they're married. They're married. Mm-hmm. As a matter of divine revelation, marriage is between one man and one woman. No polygamy, no same-sex marriage, none of that. Right? One man, one woman for life. The marriage of two baptized persons has been raised to the dignity of the sacrament by Christ. We already said that. What is a Catholic marriage? Okay, a Catholic marriage is one in which at least one of the parties is Catholic. So, like in your situation, one of you is Catholic, one of you is Baptist, one of you is Catholic, therefore your marriage is considered a Catholic marriage. Consent, as I said, consent is what makes the marriage. Some Protestant denominations believe that the marriage has to be consummated before the marriage can be considered valid. That's not the case. It's your consent and your consent alone. Not consummation, not the sexual act. Why? Why do we say that? Anybody? No?
Voluntary, you gave voluntary.
More, even more.
Even for...
If it wasn't consent alone, Mary and Joseph would not be married. Because Mary is a perpetual virgin. Mm-hmm. Mary and Joseph did not have sex. Okay? Yet they were married. So it's the consent that makes the marriage, not the consummation of the marriage. Now, yes, if canon law would say if a marriage is not consummated, that has to be looked at because maybe there's an intention against children there. Maybe it's you're not having sex because no, I don't want children, so we just want to have sex and then we want to have children, and then that's a problem. Okay, but if or when the flame of love flickers out, the marriage perdures. Okay, the marriage is not...
What's perdure?
Continues. There's a difference also between divorce and annulment. For divorce, there was a valid existing marriage bond, and it is terminated by the decision of a civil court. The Church doesn't recognize the authority of a court to do this. Andy can comment on that if he likes, right? But I'm sure Andy's had to handle many divorce cases, or I don't know if you do that sort of attorney work, but
I would handle
everything probably.
Thousands of divorce cases.
Thousands of divorce cases.
As a judge and then done several as a lawyer.
Okay. I like to say that for the Catholic Church, that word divorce is not in her vocabulary. We don't know what that word means. Based on what Jesus said. So divorce is a civil thing, a legal thing. Before you could pursue an annulment, you have to have a civil divorce. Things have to be settled, primarily for property disputes and all the stuff, the kinds of disputes that happen in a marriage. But the Church will not recognize the divorce. Okay? When it declares a marriage null, it means the marriage never happened in the first place, so there couldn't have been a divorce. divorce because there was no marriage. Where was I? Annulment, a decree of civil or church court. I mean, that Elvis case. I think there are legal civil decisions, like the teenagers go off and get married at the Elvis Chapel when they're stoned, and when they come back home, the parents right away drag them to court and get the marriage annulled because Andy's an attorney, so he knows all this. Andy, if two people go to court and they're stoned or drunk, is that a valid marriage?
I've actually got a case right now involving this very same thing about my client wants an annulment, does not want a divorce, because family pressures, they're against divorce, they don't believe in it. But anyhow, the law is that you can have an annulment based on, for example, a prior existing marriage like bigamy, or if there were misrepresentations or fraudulent representations made, or concealment. If you marry somebody and find out that they have borderline personality disorder and they're schizophrenic, and they only dated you, they only went out on dates when you were in your little house on
your good days
and Mary Poppins phase, but when you were in your dark phase, you were kind of AWOL for a while. But the law says that you have to have at least one corroborating witness as to the facts who's not interested, and also even if you were fraudulently induced to marry, but then you consummate the marriage by sexual intercourse, then that under civil law in Florida right now, that would not allow you to get an annulment, which I'm going to have to argue in my case that law should be reversed, because why is it that divorce is freely given no matter what goes on, but an annulment is different, and it's not a statute, it's a judge-made law, and judges can decide procedural things, but judges are not allowed to establish or create substantive law. That's a legislative function. So I'm going to have to argue that this long-standing case law is not applicable. It's wrong. It should be receded from. But in civil law, it's very difficult because there's a presumption. It's kind of stupid, but there's a presumption that it's one of the most ironclad presumptions, and we want to uphold and recognize the sanctity of marriage. Except if you want a no-fault divorce for any reason at all, we don't care. It's nuts.
Yeah.
But that's our law.
And you'll find, as we go through, you'll find a lot of overlap between what Andy just said from a civil point of view and what the church says. An annulment is decided by a church tribunal, and that's a church court. That sounds scary, but it shouldn't be. It's not.
It's easier to get an annulment in the Catholic Church than it is in the circuit court in Florida.
There you go. A lot of people, when they hear they're going to be called by the tribunal, they go into a complete panic, and it's not like that. It's not a terrifying situation, but so annulment is a decree of a civil or church. Even though there may have been an exchange of vows in a ceremony, from the very beginning there was never a valid existing marriage bond. Again, marrying somebody for their money, and when they lost their money, you divorced them. That's it. So you didn't marry the person for them, you married them for their money. You married the person for the green card you'd be able to get once you're married to them, because they're a citizen and you're not. That sort of thing. And then once they get their green card, they say, I want a divorce. And it turns out it's still a church court. The church court will have to investigate and say, yeah, they married you only because they wanted a green card. And as soon as they got the green card, they were out of here. So the bishops of the United States have a nice statement, I thought, and they say, we, the bishops of the United States, understand the pain for those for whom divorce seemed the only recourse. We urge them to make frequent use of the sacraments, especially the sacrament of the Holy Eucharist and reconciliation. We encourage divorced persons who wish to marry in the Catholic Church to seek counsel about the options that exist to remedy their situation, including the suitability of a declaration of nullity when there is no longer any hope of reconciliation of the spouses. That's why we're here today, because of what the bishop said to do. If there's ever a hope of reconciliation, then the tribunal will not take your case, so to speak. I tell people with annulments, the worst thing that could happen, if somebody is coming to me petitioning, they want to petition for an annulment, the worst thing that could possibly happen is for the person that you were married to say, oh no, I still love them and I want this marriage to work and I'll do anything to get back together again. That will bring the whole process to a grinding halt.
I got a true story about reconciliation.
Okay?
Back when, before no-fault divorce, this husband and wife, they only had one car, so he drove up to town, told his wife to just stay in the car, he'd be right back. He went inside, talked to his lawyer and about getting divorced, and after the lawyer interviewed him, he said, well, you don't have any grounds for divorce. And so the guy said, well, there's nothing I can do. And the lawyer was laughing. This is a true story. He was kidding. He said, well, you can shoot her. So the guy left his office and he heard a gunshot. He shot his wife.
Oh my gosh.
All on the advice of his lawyer.
And she actually survived. And after that, they continued married, had the best marriage you could ask for. She was treated. The surgeon took the bullet out.
She didn't press charges?
They didn't press charges, and they reconciled and continued their marriage.
Wow.
That's amazing.
True, that's a true story.
Now, of course,
I guess we had to talk after that, huh?
if you want to marry somebody who's currently married and you shoot their current spouse, that's not a valid marriage in the eyes of the Catholic. Yeah, I'm serious. A lot of these laws have to hold universally, right? They have to hold in some crazy place in the world somewhere where there's also, a king is allowed to shoot somebody else if he wants to marry the person's wife, and the church would say that is not a match. Sorry, no.
Like Henry VIII, just start beheading them.
Exactly. So the church law has to be universal, has to apply to everybody everywhere. What is an annulment or a declaration of nullity? What is often referred to as marriage annulment in the church is actually a declaration by a church tribunal, a Catholic church court, so to speak, that a marriage thought to be valid according to church law actually fell short of at least one of the essential elements required for a binding union. So, what are the requirements for a binding union? Well, for example, there's 6 of them listed there. The spouses have to be free to marry, no impediments. So, for example, if we can get to examples later. But you have to be free to marry. You can't have some impediment. The man and woman are capable of giving consent. So there's a certain, you have to have a certain intellectual capacity there. You have to be able to understand what marriage is and give consent to it. They freely exchange their consent. So, for example, a shotgun wedding is not valid, right? The boy gets the girl pregnant, and the girl's father comes with a shot. Boy, you're going to marry this girl, and you're going to marry her now. Not a valid marriage, okay? In consenting to marry, they have the intention to marry for life, to be faithful to one another, and to be open to having and raising children. They intend the good of each other. Okay? Their consent is given in the presence of 2 witnesses and before a properly authorized church minister. The exceptions to that last requirement must be approved by church authority, and that's called dispensation. So there are conditions. If you're Catholic and you're marrying a non-Catholic and you want to be married in a Methodist church, you can do that, but there are conditions that have to be met, and you need permission. Because the Catholic Party is subject to Catholic law. So you have to get permission to marry outside the church. I have found it amazing that I have met so many people that went to, Catholic elementary school and Catholic high school and Catholic college, and they never knew that if you're Catholic, you must be married in the Catholic Church. You can't run off to a justice of the peace or to the Methodist minister or the Presbyterian. You must be married in the Catholic Church. If you do that marriage is
that'll be grounds for having the marriage declared invalid. You didn't follow the proper form for a Catholic. And I don't know why they don't teach these things. And this is what you should learn in high school when you're starting to get to that point where you might be making a decision like that soon. If you're a Catholic, you must be married in the Catholic Church. Period. And there is an exception. If you want to get married in the Methodist Church, you have to go to the tribunal, request dispensation, and a representative of the Catholic Church, a priest or a deacon, has to be present at the Methodist wedding, for example, to witness the exchange of vows. Okay, so there's a procedure to be followed, and people don't seem to know this. Okay, there's 3 primary types of annulment: lack of form, what's called legamen, or prior bond, and a formal case. Lack of form is the easy one. This is the one-page form. This is for a Catholic, 2 Catholics, for example, who go and get married by a justice of the peace. They go to Andy and say, Andy, marry us. And then they get a divorce, and the first question I'll ask them, are you Catholic? Yes. Are you married in the Catholic Church? No. We were married by a justice of the peace. It's over right there. Fill out a form, the marriage is declared invalid because you didn't follow proper form. And so that's called lack of form. Okay. The second is...
I have a question.
Yeah.
Would lack of form apply to someone who's not Catholic?
No. Only to Catholics.
Okay.
Only to Catholics.
So if I got married by a justice of the peace, and there was no priest present, and there was no religious ceremony, I still have to go through a longer format.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
If your church may have had, other churches don't have the annulment. Protestant Baptists, I don't know exactly what Baptists do, but they don't have an annulment process, right? I don't know what Baptists do. So, but the form, it means you're Catholic. That means you have to follow Catholic form. So, the second is what they call legamen. That means prior bond. 2 people get married, but one was married before and divorced and never had an annulment. Well, if you are married before and you never had an annulment, you are not free to marry now, right? Because you're married to somebody else. We don't allow polygamy, so to speak. Again, the church doesn't recognize divorce. You can't say, oh, well, I was married, but we were divorced. No, you're still married to that person because Jesus said marriage is permanent. That person will have to have that first marriage annulled before they're free to marry in the Catholic Church. And then the third case is what we call a formal case, which is what you're talking about. You're not a Catholic. You married someone who you didn't marry someone who was not free to be married in the first place. They didn't have a previous marriage that was never annulled. You need the formal case. The marriage needs to be looked at in its totality. And we'll look at that because that's, in many cases, that's probably the most common is the formal case. And so we'll spend some time in that. There are also 4 and 5, but they're very rare. Pauline privilege and Petrine privilege. I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I have never had a Pauline privilege or Petrine privilege case. And if I did, usually the diocese will say, well, we're going to handle this for you. They don't want me in. It only applies to non-baptized persons, right? So most of the people that are like here in this room, most likely, you're all baptized, so you wouldn't qualify for Pauline or Petrine privilege. I think, Father Sebastian, you said you had a Pauline or Petrine, one or the other.
When there are 3 marriages for a person, and the second marriage was a kind of, they attended a reunion, and then one of the doctors was, he was already married to somebody, but proposed to this girl, and she married her.
Yeah, usually you don't encounter non-baptized people, and the Pauline Petrine privilege, it's not even an annulment. Okay, the church can dissolve the bond in favor of the faith. So it has to be, timing is crucial. I almost had a Pauline privilege case. Somebody
was not baptized, and then they got baptized, and they came to me and they said, "Oh, I wasn't baptized." Too late. You shouldn't have gotten baptized. You have to be unbaptized. The church will dissolve the bond, and then you get baptized and married. And as I say, those cases tend to be very rare, and I've never had one.
Well, if the person is Jewish that you married, they aren't baptized.
That's right. That's right.
So
that could be a case for Pauline or Petrine privilege.
So my family's unique because like everybody in my family was baptized in Jesus' name. They weren't baptized in like the proper formula.
Yeah, they're not considered baptized. That's right. That's right.
Okay.
That's right. That's right.
So then how would that...
There might be a part, they'd have to be, the Pauline Petrine would have to
I
be.
think that the church respects everybody's marriage, non-Catholic, Hindus.
Until it's called into question.
No?
Until it's called into question. Marriage, marriage enjoys the favor of the law.
Yeah.
Right? If you say you're married to Buddhists, to Hindus, you're married. You're married.
So they need a formal annulment
If they're not baptized, it gets a little more, could be a little more, if they want to get baptized. See, if they want to be baptized, I want to come into the church, I was never baptized, and I'm in a Hindu marriage. The church can dissolve the Hindu marriage in favor of the faith.
without going through formal.
Yeah. But that's why it's complicated. That's why they take it out of my hands immediately and they say, we're going to handle this, because there's a lot of legalities there that they make sure everything fits in the proper situation. So. But yeah, that's what, I'll repeat that again because that can't be said too often. The church, in the eyes of the church, marriage enjoys the favor of the law. Two people say they're married, they are married. We don't question them and say, well, no, if you say you're married, you're married. Okay? It's only when the marriage falls apart that we could say, well, now we could look at this and see, was there a marriage, or kind of what we're doing here. Okay? So nobody is going to tell.
The question, does the bishop okay that? Who does the review?
Technically, well, the tribunal, technically the bishop, but the bishop is, he doesn't personally get involved in it. He's got a representative.
Canonical review, is that what it is?
What?
Is it a canonical review?
Well, yeah, it follows the guidelines of canon law. It has to follow canon law, yeah. And it's the tribunal. It's called, if you go on the diocesan website, you'll see a link for the tribunal. And there's a priest that's in charge of the tribunal, and there are canon lawyers that work for the tribunal, and that's who evaluates all this.
Psychologists, they have to evaluate psychology.
Yeah. The annulment process has gotten easier since Pope Francis. It used to be a two-step process. After we made our decision here, it had to go to what was called the Court of Second Instance, and that's in Miami. And they could turn it down, even though we approved it. That's been done away with. That's thankfully, once we make the decree, it's done. So, did you have a question? Have your hand up? No. So, form.
The same thing.
What's that?
I was looking at the double.
Oh yeah, no, they're calling my name too. I'm trying to ignore them, but they're calling
your name.
Yeah, thank you.
So some of these terms, when we talk form is the ceremony itself, the public celebration or manifestation of the exchange of consent. In other words, how do you do it? Okay? And form, as I said, for Catholics, form has to be done in a Catholic church. If you don't do it in a Catholic church, no, not proper form. The specific form must be observed for all Catholic marriages for validity. There are two kinds of form for a Catholic wedding. Ordinary form is the authorized sacramental minister, that's a priest or a deacon, plus 2 witnesses. Extraordinary form are 2 witnesses only, plus danger of death, okay, or good faith belief that no authorized sacramental minister was available within about 1 month. That goes back to the days of common law marriages, when people, the big westward, everybody, there's free land out west, and they hook up to covered wagons, and they go, and there are no priests or ministers anywhere in sight in this, in those days. And 2 people want to get married. That's where common law marriage comes from. There's nobody there to marry them, but they express their consent and they get married. requirement for observance of form for a Catholic marriage is a matter of ecclesial law. And that it's church law, it's not divine law. Okay, we can't dispense divine law. What Jesus says, that's it. No, we have no authority to change anything there. But ecclesial law, church law, we can. Form can be dispensed by the bishop for a good reason. Form is never dispensed where both parties are Catholic. Okay? So, for example, this happens all the time. I get calls all the time. UF alumni, they're Catholic, or at least one is Catholic, and they want to get married at the Bauman Center. Okay, that will not get dispensation. It has to be, for example, if a Catholic is marrying a Muslim, and the Muslim family says, "No way are we ever going to set foot into a Catholic church." Okay, that you would get dispensation for. Okay, because or if there's some sort of really resentment toward the Catholic Church, and one of the parties is really, no way, we're going to have anything to do with those Catholics, then you can get permission to marry outside of a Catholic church. If both parties are Catholic, you will never get that dispensation. I've had conversations with people that they called up. You see how people don't. They call up every priest they know, and they all say nope, because they want to get married at the Bauman Center. So then they get the idea, well, call this deacon, maybe he'll marry us, And what I've tried saying to them is, have you ever visited us here at St. Madeline's? They want to get married at the Bauman Center because it's beautiful, right? It's so nice. It's in this garden setting and so forth. I said, have you ever seen our campus here? It's just as beautiful as the Bauman Center. Come and get married. I never hear back from them. They have it in their minds that they want to do what they want to do. Remember that form will never be dispensed when both parties are Catholic.
But if they aren't both Catholic,
then the tribunal will review the request.
before I die?
No, that usually they're not the speediest people in the world, but well, that's for annulments. For a dispensation, you fill out the form, they look at it, and it'll be a simple yes or no.
Is it possible?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I was gonna say, do people get married like how they want? Like two Catholics just go and get married at like the beach because they want to, and like I know they're not allowed to.
Not
but
valid.
Will they just do it anyways?
Oh yeah. Oh sure.
That's not
For the lack of form.
So then they're not actually married.
Well,
I mean,
yes, they
civil
are
marriage.
until the marriage ends with a divorce, and then gets looked at and say, "Oh no, you didn't follow form."
But when it's okay.
That's valid as long as they want it to be.
Okay.
Yeah, they're married. Yeah, they're married. Marriage enjoys the favor of the law. Even if they're married civilly, they shouldn't. They're both Catholic. Got married civilly. They're married. Marriage enjoys the favor of the law. Yes, they can go to communion. Andy, that's the problem you had at one point, right? When you were people telling, well, you're excommunicated because you got married outside the church. That's not excommunication.
Yeah, I did. My wife and I, she was Methodist, and we wanted to get married at St. James Catholic Church in Falls Church, Virginia. And so, we went through pre-Cana with the Monsignor, who actually was the one that baptized me. And he broke down where he wanted her almost to sign in blood that she would not interfere with the practice of my faith, and she would not interfere with the raising children Catholic. And she said, I'm not going to interfere with his faith. I'm delighted he's finally got baptized at 19 or 20 years of age. And, what the children ultimately do is going to be a matter of conscience for them, but I'm not going to interfere with that. And he wants to do that. And for some reason, he didn't think that was sufficient. And so he was balking and not giving his approval. And so, my mother-in-law had made arrangements for church, reception, all this other stuff. And my wife and I dated 3 years, and we really wanted to get married. So we got married in her church. And then after we got back, our honeymoon was in Pennsylvania Dutch country, which to this day disgusts our children. They think it should have been something more like a destination or romantic. The Amish, you all went to the Amish country? That figures. But so when I came back the first Sunday, he was greeting everyone going into church, and he said, "Hey, how's your love life going?" And I said, "Well, it's actually going pretty good. I got married." "Oh? What Catholic church did you get married in?" Well, it was not a Catholic church, it was a Methodist church. Well, who was the priest who officiated and celebrated that marriage? Well, it was a Methodist minister. That's it. You have to leave. You're excommunicated. You're not allowed in here. In front of all these people coming in. And I'm like, so I turned around, left, got my car. I got back home. My wife said, wow, it's a really short mass today. They always have at least an hour and a half mass on Sunday. I said, uh-huh. She said, what's wrong? And I told her, she said she was about ready to go up there and give that Monsignor a feature. And I said, I think I'm in enough trouble already, so just cool it. So I ran into a Baptist minister where I was working. I was going to grad school and also working part-time as a lifeguard to make some money. And Baptist minister was really good friends with Father Pascal Balkan at St. Lawrence Catholic Church. They did a lot of ecumenical things together. So he said, you need to go talk to him. I explained everything to him. He didn't believe what I was saying. He listened and I goes, okay, fine, you can leave. And so I thought, well, that didn't work. And so he called me later to come back in. He said, everything you said was true. And I said, well, I'm not going to lie to you, Father. And he said, well, that guy's a nut. And I said, well, So anyhow, he made arrangements. He said he got it all worked out with a bishop in Richmond, and he was going to marry us again. So we got married June 16th at her church and July 14th at St. Lawrence Catholic Church. And my wife was happy to help me out with that. Her mother-in-law, the first time I went over there for dinner, after all this kind of hit the fan, she said, well, you do regard yourself as married, don't you? And I've always had a wicked sense of humor. I said, well, my father has hired a really good canonical lawyer, a canon lawyer, and I think I can get out of this and beat it. And she was really not happy with that answer, because she said, you mean after all the money that my husband and I spent for the reception and everything else and helping you all with your honeymoon, you don't think you're married? And I said, no, I'm kidding. And my wife had to say, Mom, that's his sense of humor. It's warped. It's a warped sense of humor. But being told you're excommunicated in front of 20 or 30 people coming into church and looking at you like, what kind of
all part of the misinformation that exists.
What kind of horrible, wicked, evil person are you?
Oh, I've had so many people tell me that they got divorced, and their pastor told them, you're excommunicated if you're divorced.
Divorce anniversaries, do you have an extra expense?
Well, husbands have to take advantage of every opportunity to do nice things for their wives. So every time I bring home the bulletin from St. Madeleine, for July 14th, I said, hey, they have our wedding anniversary in the bulletin. Are you still pulling that on me? Because it says July 14th, and she says June 16th. And so, we go round and round, and so she said, well, I got married June 16th, you got married July 14th.
Well, that it's a good point, because, as I say, marriage enjoys the favor of the law. So if two Catholics get married by the justice of the peace, they are married. But if they want to get it right, then they get married in the church afterwards, it's not called a marriage, it's called a convalidation. So you don't get remarried, that's it. We recognize that you were married, and your marriage is now convalidated. Some people say we're going to have our marriage blessed. That's the common.
My wife was not really happy with the first one. I said, I want to receive the sacraments. I want to be able to return, in good standing with the church. And she said, well, I'll do it. Whatever you need to do, I'll do it.
Divorce is not the problem in the sense, divorce is a problem. But as I said, the church doesn't have that word divorce in her vocabulary. The problem is divorce and remarriage without the annulment. Okay, because that's against the commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery. Right? And for a mixed marriage too, I should add that for this dispensation, that is not hard to get. It doesn't take long to get a dispensation when a Catholic marries a non-Catholic. The non-Catholic party must sign a statement that they will agree to bring the children up in the practice of the faith. So, if you don't sign that, there won't be a dispensation.
Maybe we could list Andy twice in the church directory. Is labeling each one, so in the bulletin, it will show up twice every year.
He'll have to buy 2 gifts then for his wife.
I'm working on it. I got it from the Methodist Church to the Anglican Church, and I'm trying to get it from the Anglican Church to the Catholic Church. And what I found is, the more I try to discuss this and with her and convince her, the less likely it's going to happen.
Right.
When other people talk to her and other people witness, she gets moving further along. So I've had to do something that's almost impossible for me, and that is to keep my mouth shut.
Especially since you get paid by the word.
Deacon, does it matter? My wife's Baptist, and I let everyone know that she came with preconceived ideas about Catholics.
She came to what?
Preconceived, horrible ideas, reading stuff, and so on and so forth. So I show her what we're doing, how we feed people, how we take care of our own, how we take care of a knight that's gravely ill. And it's softening her, because I notice when another person says it, as you were saying, she listens more. And of course, I'm just too close to the situation. So what I say is, I don't really come at her and say, you have to do this. I say, well, this is what we're doing, and this is how we've done it, and this, so she's softening her stance. When she gets better and starts to walk a little more, she'd like to come, in and do her thing. And another person who I bring some of my brothers over, nights over, Rick Goodman, and they talk to her, and she says, you guys aren't that bad. I said, well, thank you. So yeah, it is very hard.
Jesus said a prophet is not honored in his own hometown, right? So that means family members are often not the best ones to try to convince other family members.
Not in any aspect, even medically, you want somebody else to,
That's right.
So, in faithfulness to Jesus' teaching, the church believes that marriage is a lifelong bond. Therefore, unless one spouse has died, the church requires a divorced person to obtain a declaration of nullity before marrying someone else in the Catholic Church, or before actually becoming Catholic, right? And the tribunal process seeks to determine if something essential was missing at the moment of consent, that is, the time of the wedding. If so, the church can declare that a valid marriage was never actually brought about on the wedding day. And let's look at some,
When they say that means they were never married, like it wasn't a valid marriage,
It's not the marriage never happened.
Yes,
it didn't
does that
exist.
mean they were committing the sin of fornication the whole time?
They were civilly married, So, I'm not sure I follow what you're saying exactly.
Because if the marriage never happened.
If you get married civilly, get a divorce, and then the marriage gets annulled later down. No, you were legally married. You're not fornicating. Okay. You understood your marriage enjoys the favor of the law. You were married in the eyes of the law, and even in the eyes of the church. It was only when the marriage was called into question now that you look, was this a valid marriage?
Okay. So it's not like they're like, oh man, I was living in sin this whole time.
Yeah, that's the other nonsense you hear, that, well, your children will be illegitimate, your son will be a bastard. No. You were legally married, this is not a question of that. That's the nonsense that you hear about people who don't want to get an annulment because then I'll have been a prostitute, or I've been a fornicator, or I've been no.
Thank you.
Yeah. So again, the 3 attentions: permanence, till death do we part. You have to mean that. Faithfulness, you're not going to go playing around. Okay, you got to mean that too, and you got to be open to children. Okay? Those are the 3 essential elements there. Again, that faithfulness part. I remember one case I was working on. It wasn't even in this diocese, so it's safe to talk about it. But the woman didn't have a very, very strong case. But I was trying to work with her, trying to get something, and she did her formal case. She gave me the final document ready to be sent in, and I said, let's hope for the best. And then we were just chatting. And she was telling me the story about how, I remember when we went shopping for our engagement ring. We were in the jewelry store, and I said to my fiancé at the time, you know what my parents did that I thought was so beautiful? They inscribed inside their rings, I give you all my love. Let's do that. And he said, oh, I'm not going to do that. And there were other people in the store, they all kind of, and she said, what do you mean you won't do that? He goes, I don't intend to give you all my love. Yeah. Okay, I gave her paperwork back, and I said, you put that in very clearly, because there's your grounds. He was an intention against fidelity. He was planning to fool around. I know another case where this guy, this was again another diocese, the Panhandle, where they have a lot of military bases. This guy, a lot of people get married just before they're deployed, right? That seems to be a common thing. Okay, I'm going to go off to Iraq, but I'm going to be a married man, and I'll come back. And at the bachelor party, someone said to the groom, this came out in one of boy, how are you going to be able to handle that? Newly married, and now you're going to be deployed. What are you going to do? He goes, hey, I'm getting married. I'm not becoming a monk, So, intention against fidelity. He was planning to fool around. No. That's not the intent. You want to go in for life, faithful to your spouse for life, with the intention of having children. If any of those is not there, then these are grounds for annulment.
Well, that goes along with the priest who stopped the service to reprimand the groom. He said the correct response is, I do, not I'll try.
Or I'll think about it, right? It's important that when you look at the grounds for an annulment, it has to be at the time of the courtship, wedding, very beginning of the marriage. A lot of times you hear a couple was married for 30 years and they drifted away and that was it. It was no. It has to be at the time of the marriage. Like the two examples that I just gave you. The guy said, I don't intend to be faithful to you. Right there. If after 30 years he goes and has an affair, that's not grounds for an annulment. That's grounds for forgiveness by the other party, as difficult as that might be. Right? How many times should I forgive my... I remember one case I was talking to somebody, there was a Baptist woman, and she had a similar sort of situation. And she was really on a high hog, boy, my husband cheated on me, and I divorced him, and what would you say I should do? If he did it twice, he cheated on me twice. And I just looked at her and said, how many times should I forgive my brother? 7 times? And she burst into tears and she said, that's exactly what my Baptist minister said to me. After a 30-year marriage that falls apart, it's forgiveness, not divorce and annulment. It has to be at the time of the wedding to show that the proper consent was never there. Permanence, faithfulness, and openness to children. That's why it has to be in bold there at the time of the wedding. And so we look for impediments. An impediment is a blockage. It bars the valid exchange of consent. For example, if you're not married and you get your girlfriend pregnant and marry because she's pregnant, those are that's why did you marry? Well, because she was pregnant. Well, that's not grounds for a basis for a marriage. That would be a solid ground. Pregnancy at the time of marriage. Though impediments come from both divine law and ecclesiastical law. Again, divine law impediments cannot be dispensed. Jesus said, if you married someone who is divorced, they're causing them to commit adultery. Impediments from church law, ecclesiastical law, only apply to Catholic marriages, and they can be dispensed. Okay, like we talked about the different rules for impediments from divine law that apply to all marriage. And this is, Naomi, what you brought up, impotence. Okay? Impotence means the inability to engage in the marital act. If you can't have sex, you can't get married. If a man can't get an erection, he can't get married. Okay? Not the inability to have children, that's something totally different because of some medical or physical condition. But you have to be able to engage in the act to have children. Okay? For impotence to be invalidating, it must be permanent. There are situations where, you're on medication and it could make you impotent. That's not permanent. You get off that medication, you're no longer impotent. That doesn't count. And it has to be antecedent to the marriage, right? You marry somebody perfectly capable of performing the marital act, but then they get into some horrible accident that, they can't anymore. That doesn't count. It has to be antecedent to the marriage. Before you're married, you have to know you can't engage in the sexual act. Don't ask me about consanguinity. That gets so complicated. It means you can't marry your up to your third cousin, right? I remember when we were studying canon law.
we had to look at all these crazy, what I call spaghetti diagrams. Okay, this one was married to that, and that family was this, and that. You had to do all this to pass the test. But basically, the bottom line is you can't be related to the person you're marrying.
There's only a real worry or concern in the West Virginia diocese.
Oh, I don't know. North of I-10 in the Florida Panhandle, I think that's a big problem too. You marry your first cousin all the time there.
Deliverance.
It gets very complicated, the concept, but you can't. But the simple thing is, we all know this. You can't marry your cousin, right? You could marry your fourth cousin, is it, but not your third or something, right?
Not avoid anyone with cousin.
How often does that happen? Not very. And then legamen, prior bond. You can't marry somebody who's been married and hasn't had an annulment because they're still married to that person. So again, that's an easy case. All you have to do is show them, my husband and I got divorced, but when I married him, he was married to somebody else. He wasn't Catholic. He didn't have an annulment. It's an easy one. Okay. The formal case, two Catholics getting married by the justice of the peace, is easy. Prior bond is easy. Formal case is it's not as, let me put it this way, it's not as complicated as it once used to be. Okay. The church is, that's divine law. That's divine law. Because again, in that gospel, if we went on a little bit, Jesus said something about people incapable of marriage. That means eunuch or something like that. The kings used to have their eunuchs castrated, so they couldn't have sex with his not just wife, but his whole contingency, his concubines. Yeah. So how do you keep your concubines from falling in love with your minions? You have them castrated. So that's. They would not be able to get married because they screwed themselves over by having that happen. The impediments from ecclesial law, those can be dispensed for Catholic marriages only. We can't tell Baptist churches what to do, right? We can only talk about ourselves, Catholic churches. Underage, now that varies legally and from place to place. But canon law says girls must be 14, boys must be 16. Okay? I don't know, Andy, what is that in Florida? 14, 16, does that hold in Florida as well?
I actually don't know. I've never dealt with a situation like that, but I think it's the age of majority is 18.
18, okay. Again, this is church law. It has to apply universally. And so the universal statement is in whatever it is, Outer Mongolia or something. Girls have to be 14, boys must be 16. Okay, that you may not be able to get the marriage license from the state if you're underage, and that's another problem. A vow of chastity in a religious institution. So, for example, Father Sebastian here is a member of a religious order. He cannot be married ever, even if he left his religious order. We would say if he attempted marriage, it would be an invalid marriage. Okay. Disparity of cult, marriage between a Catholic and an unbaptized person is invalid unless dispensation is obtained. Okay.
And what if it's a Christian and not just...
If you want to marry the Christian in the Catholic Church, it's
if the Christian married his first, like in a marriage, that wasn't a valid, really, marriage, but she was unbaptized, never was baptized.
And she married who? And he wasn't Catholic, he was Christian. Yeah. If the person wasn't, disparity of cult is the marriage between a Catholic, so Catholic means you're baptized. Okay, if you're not baptized, you're not Catholic.
But if he married someone that wasn't
doesn't apply.
It only applies to Catholics.
All the exceptions apply to the Catholics.
Catholics. That's as we call the ecclesial law. It applies only to Catholics.
And you have to be 18 years old in Florida. If you're 17, with the permission of your guardian or parent, you can get married.
Unless you want to have an abortion, you don't need anybody's permission for that.
That's right.
My grandma got married at 15 with permission from her parents.
And Florida does not recognize common law marriages.
Okay. Yeah, common law marriage is really an outdated idea. This is exactly the Wild West, no priest, ministers, anybody around, no churches around.
Iroquois are attacking, you circle the wagons, you say you want to get married, what do? You know, you express your consent in front of, that's common law marriage. And that's good because that solves a lot of problems, because then couples living together could, you know, if one is wealthy and the other is not so wealthy, they could say, oh, it was a common law marriage, I get half that property, you know, but Andy, you say in Florida.
What if you've been together more than 7 years?
Florida, Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, Florida does not allow common law marriage.
No, it was abolished, I want to say, in 68 or something like that. It was finally abolished because it creates just pure havoc, and it encourages massive perjury when you're dealing with probate estates. Because people will say, well, we were married, and as a surviving spouse, I'm entitled to this percentage. And then if there's stepchildren or something like that involved, then they attack it and argue there was no actual common law marriage, and the requirements for that were not established. And so it just becomes ridiculous. We want to have certainty. That's why if you do a deed or you're transferring property, it has to be recorded. If it's not recorded, then then you're at risk of losing out on everything, and it creates havoc with trying to understand exactly what the legal relationships and rights are.
Common law marriage is really an obsolete concept. Gotcha. It really is. Doesn't do anyone any good. Holy orders. So an ordained person, marriage after holy orders is invalid. It also incurs automatic excommunication. There's a case where the church says no. If a bishop, priest, or deacon gets ordained as such and then goes off and gets married, not only is the marriage not valid, he is excommunicated. So this is serious business, okay? Holy orders after marriage is valid. So, for example, in my case, I was married and then I was ordained, and that's perfectly okay. But once men tend to die before, wives outlive their husbands, usually is how that goes, right? So, if Carol were to pass away, which is not going to happen, right, I could not be remarried. That would not be a valid marriage. And if I did, I would be excommunicated. Right? Attempted marriage. But that's, a lot of it in the Orthodox Church, you see this all the time because there's a rush for them to get married before they're ordained, as whatever it is. Anyway, adoption is the same as by blood. Okay, you might say, well, there's no blood relation there, but yeah, adoption is considered family. You can't do this despicable Woody Allen stuff. What did he do? Woody Allen married his adopted daughter or something like that.
His stepdaughters.
No, you can't do that. You can't do that. Andy, what is the legal situation in those in Florida? Do you know the legality? Can a man marry an adopted child from Florida? In the church, you can. It won't be a valid marriage.
Because that establishes the legal relationship of parent-child. And so that's just, as a parent-child, that's just not allowed.
Yeah, it's incest, right. It comes down to incest, even in the case of adoption.
Well, biologically, it may be completely different.
Yeah.
But legally, it's can't have it.
And there's the one I was talking about before, conjugicide. I have never encountered that, but you can't marry a person whose spouse you have murdered. And again, you could see this happening in some crazy little banana republic countries, right? I mean,
it's happening today.
Exactly. I want to marry this woman, but she's married to that bozo there. I'm the law. I'm going to kill him, and that's the end of that, right?
Well, look what David did.
That's what David did to Uriah.
Poor Uriah.
Abduction, you can't, if you abduct somebody and marry them, it's not a valid marriage. Okay.
The shotgun marriage, not valid.
That's right.
Surprise.
Public property, you can't marry the parent or child of the person you're living with. Okay. That's all church law. Consent is the biggie. Consent is important. A marriage is valid if proper form was observed. Okay, so again, if you're Catholic, you're married in the Catholic Church. There were no impediments. You didn't marry somebody who was married before. You didn't marry somebody who was ordained, or you didn't do any of those things. And the man and women were ready, willing, and able on their wedding day to consent to marriage as the Church understands it. On their wedding day, if they change their mind 30 years later, that doesn't matter. That's where forgiveness kicks in. On their wedding day. That's what the formal case looks for. That's what a lot of times, Father Sebastian, you deal with people that they're in their 70s, in their 80s, and they're looking for an annulment, and you tell them, we need witnesses from the time of your courtship and wedding to that, well, they're all dead, you know. I mean, so we have to put that in a statement there, saying there's no one left at the time. You know, siblings are dead, parents are dead, everybody's dead. There's no witnesses.
This is off subject, but while Father's here, I was going to ask this question. What do you have? You have two, a man and woman, they've lost their spouses, they died, and they're both widower, and they love each other, they want to get married, but then they find out that if they get married, it really messes up Social Security or pensions. And I had someone who had a fantastic railroad pension that was negotiated years ago, but if he got married, then he would, they would lose a lot of that. And so they didn't, economically, they couldn't afford to do that. And so they were not Catholics, by the way, but, and I arranged for a Baptist minister to solemnize their relationship and to, in effect, call it a marriage. They didn't get a marriage license. They didn't go to the clerk's office, but they didn't want to commit adultery. And they were afraid that their minister, who was very, very conservative, in some ways he's more orthodox than a lot of our Catholic bishops, but that's another story. I won't go into that. But anyhow, so I arranged for him to do that, and he accommodated them, and he said, in the eyes of the church, in my eyes as your minister, you are married and you're not committing adultery. And so legally they kept getting their retirements and everything. What would happen if two Catholic widowers came to you, Father Sebastian, and said, would you do something, to solemnize our relationship and make us kosher? But still, we don't want to come to church and be committing adultery in your eyes. We want to receive the sacraments, but we don't want Social Security or anyone else to find out or know about this. What would be your response? Tough luck, I'm sorry, I can't help you, or what?
I did help the one couple in Palm Coast. Palm Coast is a senior place, so this was real.
That's, our laws have to change there. Our laws have to, that is not fair. Our laws are forcing people to commit fornication.
Yeah. Right. And these couple were so sweet, they were just in horror. They did not want to do anything. They were not going to consummate their relationship, nothing until they were properly married. But at the same time, the normal legal avenues would economically ruin them.
I know one way around it, if, again, the clergy are going out on a limb here to do it. But I know of a Greek Orthodox priest in Chicago, fantastic, wonderful man that I'm happy to say I know to some degree. And what he said is, the state of he's in Chicago, the state of Illinois allows same-sex unions. He said, I refuse to act as an agent of the state in marriage. I just don't recognize the laws of Illinois. So he tells couples, you want to get married? Do what you want to do with a marriage license. You want to go get a marriage license? Get one. Get a civil union. But I don't care. Come to me and I'll marry you in the church. And that solves that problem.
Well, are they heterosexual or homosexual?
Oh, it's heterosexual.
Oh,
Oh yeah, no. This is he would never marry two men or two women.
Right.
But to act as an agent of the state, he's saying I kind of have to go along with the laws of the state. And he goes, I'm not going to do it. I refuse to do that. So do what you want to do as far as the marriage license goes, and then come to me and I'll marry you in the church, with or without a license. For us to marry somebody, we have to sign the marriage license that we performed a ceremony. So I don't know what happens if there is no, we probably get into trouble if there's no marriage license.
In Mexico, the government is very antagonistic towards the church. So a couple getting married in the church is not related to a legal marriage. They have to get married inside of a courthouse, and then traditionally he'll get married by the church 2 days later.
See, I think that's the way to do it.
The priest doesn't have to do any civil work. I guess the priest now is like the justice of the peace legally.
Yes.
Not so in Mexico.
People will come to church, you can marry them. Now, there won't be a marriage license for me to sign, and that might be where I could get into trouble. But I could marry, if they express their consent before two witnesses and me, In the eyes of God, in the eyes of the church, they're married.
The Mexican priest is
They are the
fulfilling
ministers of
the
that
will.
sacrament.
Yeah, that's right. Whether they go and get a marriage license or not, in a certain sense, I don't care, but that's where we might get into trouble if we did that. I don't know.
I know my grandparents on my mom's side, they needed health insurance really bad, and for the doctor that my grandma needed, and so it just wouldn't work as them married, so they just like civilly got divorced so she could get the insurance that she needed, and then they just continued their married life as if nothing happened.
Yeah.
And so that's how they did that.
Yeah, laws need to change. If laws
Yeah,
force
yeah.
people to do things that are sinful, then the laws need to change.
So,
But that's not our...
but I mean, it wasn't, I feel like God said divorce is not a thing anyway, so like,
Yeah.
they stayed together, it wasn't like either of them went off and
That's
committed
right.
adultery, so.
So defects, if you're thinking about getting an annulment, what are the defects? Lack of reason, not able to reason, that's one that's abused most often. But insanity, mental retardation, drug, alcohol-induced temporary state, that...
Your sanity normally doesn't come until you have children.
So true.
Lack of due discretion, that's really the one that gets abused a lot. Immaturity, that was one of the most common grounds. Lack of canon law 1095 paragraph 2, lack of due discretion, that's what you put down for the ground. Rome actually came after the United States once and said, does anyone there have any discretion whatsoever? Are you all unable to, because that's a vague one that people abuse all the time. That's able to reason, but have not done so. Let's just get married. I never thought about this, but let's just get married. Inability or incapacity to assume the obligation of marriage. Able to reason, and you do reason, but you're not capable of taking the obligation of marriage because of some psychic disorder. Alcoholism, serious personality disorders, homosexuality, right? Politicians marry sometimes, they're homosexual, but they marry because to get elected, people want to see husband-wife, together, happy family. There have been cases of that, right, where the person is really homosexual. Again, that would be an easy annulment because they were homosexual, but they married so they can get elected, Defects of intellect, ignorance. Ignorance is the absence of knowledge, right? The church requires that the parties to a marriage must have at least a basic understanding that marriage is permanent, heterosexual, and ordered to the procreation of children by sexual means, not artificial means, right? Not in vitro fertilization or any of that stuff. And that's why we have things like marriage prep programs, pre-Cana programs, where at least somebody has at least told them the words, whether it penetrates or not is another story. But
Can you take like fertility drugs?
they'll do
like shots or like.
Yeah, there's approved methods of couples who are infertile.
Yeah.
There are some church approved methods.
Still like procreate in the way that God intended, but like while taking medicine to increase the chance.
Yeah, there are approved ways of fertility for infertile couples, but there are also incorrect, in vitro, for example, is out. The law of the church presumes that one who has reached puberty is not ignorant of this, but this presumption can be rebutted by evidence, right? I mean, if you reach puberty, you understand about sex, but maybe you don't. Maybe you're still a child. There's error. Andy was speaking about error, mistaken knowledge. There's 4 types of error of intellect that can affect validity. Error of a person. I didn't know that they were a convicted murderer, and they never told me that when they were married, and that they, error of quality of a person. I didn't think they were going to beat me up or abuse me. They were nice to me during the engagement, that sort of thing, and then they became a violent monster after we were married. Error resulting from fraud or malice. I tell you something about me that's not true, and you marry me. Error regarding the essential property of marriage, unity, indissolubility, sacramental dignity. If I never knew that person, it's one of the cases that if I had known that about them when we were engaged, I would not have married them. That's what the error of intellect and error of intellect. If I knew that they were horribly addicted to drugs and had no intention of getting rehabilitated or improving. No. They kept that from me.
That answers a long time question I had about a couple who was going through their pre-marriage discussions with myself and my wife. And on the third night, this guy finally admitted, if I had a choice of giving up my marriage or giving up drugs, I'd give up the marriage.
There you go.
She was shocked. They still got married.
Wow.
Did they get divorced?
I don't know.
No. But there would be grounds for
But the
annulment.
church still married them knowing that he said that.
Oh, that shouldn't have happened. That shouldn't have happened.
The priest down in South Florida said, we don't have the right to deny marriage. And I had a funny
You
feeling.
don't have the right to deny, but they have the right to delay.
Yeah. Well, they delay and
The church
delay.
can't deny a sacrament, but can delay a sacrament.
I was worried about those two.
If I were that priest, I would have told that guy, you got to get yourself into a rehab program and show you want to, get yourself clean, and then we can marry you. Until then, no.
I'll stop when we get engaged. I'll stop when we get
Right.
married. I'll stop when we have kids.
Or the wife says about the husband, I'll change him once we're married.
Yeah. Oh, that's, yeah.
Very common.
That one always bothered me.
Let's go. We're getting late here, so let's go through these defects of will. Simulation, saying I do when I mean I don't. Okay, you could say whatever you want to say, but what do you mean? Total simulation is going through the motions but having no intention at all to enter marriage, e.g. a fraudulent marriage to get a green card. Okay, so you do everything right, I love you and I'll stay with you forever, and go through all the motions. You don't mean it, but how do you know that? How do you know that at the time? You don't, right? Partial simulation is intending to exclude an essential element or condition of marriage, for example, indissolubility or procreation. So I'll marry you, I love you, I'll stay with you for life, but I do not want to have children. There are conditions, conditional marriage, I'll marry you under the condition that. Prenuptial agreements are often a concern there, and the tribunal will look very carefully at prenuptial agreements because sometimes it's a matter of preserving inheritance rights for families and children and so forth. But sometimes prenuptial agreements are, if I'm going to marry you, but I have the money and you're not going to get a penny of it if we get divorced. It's going to go that kind of thing. Entering into that very statement. If we should get divorced, divorce should not be in our vocabulary. That word should not be there. Right? If you're marrying somebody, you can't say if we get divorced. Future conditions. I'll marry you on the condition that you get accepted into medical school and become a doctor. Present or past conditions. Marriage valid if condition is fulfilled. I'll marry you under the condition that you went to medical school. I marry you on the condition that you are free of sexually transmitted diseases. Or you can't put conditions on the bond. It's either you do or you don't. I do or I don't. Force or fear. Marriage consent must be freely given, a freely given act of will. Force or fear can invalidate a marriage, and for example, that's where the pregnancy before marriage comes in. I don't want my child to be illegitimate, the woman says. What am I going to do? I can't support myself and the child. I'll marry the guy because he said he'll support me, If the marriage fails, that was force or fear to be married. The force to make the marriage invalid must be external to the person and must come from the outside. The kind of force we're talking about is brute force or physical force, the proverbial shotgun wedding. Okay, if you don't marry this girl, I'm going to shoot you. That's force or fear, and that's a very healthy fear. Not want to be shot. Fear is a more subtle form of force, like intimidation. This is where people can get nasty, right? They can manipulate and what do they call it? Gaslighting. What was that famous movie from the 40s, Gaslighting, where the guy got his wife committed to an insane asylum because he slowly, over time, convinced her she was crazy. Right. And she eventually became crazy. People are saying that's what our government is doing to us now. They're gaslighting.
They are.
They are. That's right. So that's a very subtle one. Threat or intimidation must be grave. If the person would have gone through with the marriage, even if the source of fear had not been present, then the fear would not invalidate the marriage. Okay. So, we all have defects in our personalities that everybody might have a little bit of a control or manipulation bit but I think both parties know that. I mean, you knew when you were marrying me that you were not getting the better half of the deal.
No, you're perfect.
But you said, I understand, he's a jerk sometimes, and I'll marry him anyway.
No, I've seen pictures of your wedding day. You would both look really good.
And we were talking before, Pauline privilege, very rare. The dissolution of marriage, not an annulment, dissolution of a marriage of two persons not baptized at the time the marriage occurred. The Pauline privilege is drawn from Paul's things in 1 Corinthians there. And we're not going to go into that because I think everybody here is baptized. And then Petrine privilege, also very rare, also known as the privilege of the faith or favor of the faith. It allows for dissolution of by the Pope. So that's why that one gets complicated. Now again, it's not going to be the Pope, it's going to be somebody in some committee that the Pope is authorized to act on his behalf. But it's the dissolution, not the annulment, the dissolution by the Pope of a valid natural marriage between a baptized and a non-baptized person for the sake of the salvation of the soul. So it has to be like the baptized person. I don't even know what to say.
He's become a Satanist.
Exactly.
Exactly.
It's that kind of crazy stuff. Then they could. I put a little table in here because that might help you know where, if you're seeking an annulment, where maybe you fit in. So the first column is the people. Who are you? The place of the marriage and the process needed. So, for example. Skip the table, because I think it's self-explanatory. We pretty much said everything that's in it. If you're Catholic, and both Catholic, you got to marry in the Catholic Church. And if you get divorced, a formal case is needed. That's all. You could figure that out. And below the table, I even put in, there's 15 things, and I put in 15 explanations to make it a little more clear. So after an annulment is granted, the parties are free to marry in the church. Usually with the proviso that they must have a readiness for marriage assessment. Usually, a lot of times people make the same mistake over and over and over and over again. This is the Q&A part. If the marriage is declared null, does that mean that the marriage never existed? In the eyes of the church, yes, that's what it means. The declaration of nullity means that you were never married in the eyes of God. You never entered into a marriage as Jesus understood marriage. This is where people say, well, then my children are illegitimate and all this sort of thing. No, because you were legally married to. It's not that it doesn't dissolve the legal things. That the court records are still there. They can go look up and see that in October 5th, 1972, so-and-so were married. Yes, so this question of illegitimate children, which is often thrown in your face, is, and again, that's the second one. Are the children considered illegitimate? No, for the reasons we just said. Why does the Catholic Church require an intended spouse who is divorced but not Catholic to obtain a declaration of nullity before marrying in the Catholic Church? First statement there, this is often a difficult and emotional issue. I hear this all the time, but I'm not Catholic. Why do I have to abide by Catholic rules? Well, because you want to get married in the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church takes marriage very, very, very seriously. Right? Because Jesus took it very, very, very seriously. So if you want to enter into the Catholic faith, you have to understand marriage the way we say Jesus understood marriage. So that's why this difficult question that I hear so often, I'm not Catholic, why do I have to go through this nonsense? Well, that's why. Okay. Is divorce sinful? Well, like anything, my answer there has to be not necessarily. If your understanding was that divorce ended the marriage, it's sinful. Now, I'm not married anymore because I got a civil divorce. Okay. No, if you got divorced, and as sad as that is, and recognize that in the eyes of God I'm still married to that person, then no, the divorce is not sinful. It's an intention, it's yes, it's what you do, but it's your intention. That's really what the most important thing is. You know, we were talking the other day about somebody who wanted to express themselves very emphatically, and they said, "Oh, I heard that," and I said, "WTF." You know, as far as I'm concerned, you might as well just say it at that point, because that's what you're thinking. Your intention is to say that. You don't ever say that. Don't ever say that. And you can't fool, or some people say, "Oh shoot," you know. Well, your intention is to say something else. You know, "Oh crap," or "Oh this," or "Oh that." It's your intention. You know, look at the confiteor at Mass. How we what was that?
I'm in trouble.
We all are. Yes. We all are. You know, there's that hierarchy in the confiteor that we say at Mass. In my thoughts, in my words, in what I have done, and in what I have failed to do. Sometimes what you fail to do can be just as sinful as what you do. And where do the thoughts, where does the sin begin? In my thoughts.
Sins of omission.
Sins of omission and what I have failed to do. That's right. So,
For all these years working on cleaning up my Tourette's with euphemisms, I haven't accomplished anything. That's what you're telling me.
how much does an annulment cost? It costs nothing, thanks to Pope Francis. I always, back in the days when we were charging $500 per formal case, I would cringe. I'm saying, I would apologize. I'm so sorry, but it's what we're supposed to be doing here. And the tribunal would say, it's just covering our expenses. It's covering our costs. Well, that's what you give money for week after week in the offertory. That's what's supposed to be covering the costs, not you come to get your life straight and right, and now you got to, no. Thank you, Pope Francis. There's no more charge for an annulment. At least that I know of in this country. Who knows what goes on in Pago or wherever, but that's something else, right? If I do not plan to remarry, why should I seek an annulment? Well, the annulment is, in a certain sense, a healing process. In any marriage that failed, it does take two to tango, so to speak. It causes you to stop and reflect and say, what went wrong, and did I have a part in what went wrong? And do I see a flaw, maybe something in myself that I need to improve upon? If you don't plan to remarry, then no, you don't need the annulment. But it's sometimes a healthy exercise to do so. So if it's done right, if it's done in the right spirit. For a couple how can a couple who has been married for many years present a case? Well, this is the formal case. This is what the tribunal does. This is what your document that you write up, your multi-page document that they're going to ask you, well, if you came to me or Father Sebastian, we would give you questions to answer that kind of shape, show what was your childhood like? What were your parents like? What did they think of divorce? What did you think of the church? What was your relationship with people in authority over you? Question after question to help, and then they start to get into the time of the courtship and marriage. A lot of times, people, your friends, your best man, your maid of honor, all those kind of people, your parents if they're still alive and so forth, they saw red flags, but people are so reluctant to say anything, because if you do, you're going to wind up losing a friend. If you tell the guy, you really should not marry that woman, I don't like what I see here, and what's he going to say? You don't mind your own business, you lose the friend. But after the divorce happens, the witnesses are the people who will say things like, yeah, I knew all along there was a problem here. I didn't want to say anything, but there was a problem. It's understand human weakness. We don't want to hurt anybody. Maybe the marriage. Let me think. Let's hope for the best here. Maybe the marriage is going to work. Maybe.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but the Bible does say if you don't love your wife, you don't love yourself. Is that the verse that Deacon Cuesta actually said during one of the homilies? He said it verbatim, and I remember him saying, if you don't love your wife, you don't love yourself. It says that.
Well, Ephesians says, husbands, love your wives the way Christ loved the church. I don't know if that's what he's referring to, but okay.
But in a certain sense, logically, you can derive that proposition by the fact that the two are supposed to become one flesh and be one, husband and wife.
No one hates his own body.
Then you're not loving that one flesh, which is you too.
But I mean, I don't know about those words exactly, you know. What if my formal spouse will not agree to an annulment? Oh, how do I start the process? You talk to the pastor or the deacon in the parish to start the process. What if my former spouse will not agree to an annulment? Well, it depends how they don't agree. If they said what I said, they might say, no, I still love that person. I will do anything to make that marriage work. I will take them back in a heartbeat. You're not going to get anywhere. That's never, I don't know when that has never happened in my 20 years of whatever. That's never happened. Usually it's divorced, they're divorced and it's over and that's that. It's still a legal proceeding in the eyes of the church. A tribunal is a church court. So if you're petitioning for an annulment, there is a respondent that gets technically to see the documents that you're saying the marriage was invalid, and they get to respond. 99% of the time, they don't respond. As I say, if they respond by saying, no, I love this person, I want this marriage to work, I want to take her back, and then sorry, stop. But if the respondent doesn't agree, they usually just don't even respond. Or if they do, it's like, I'm over with that person. Hell with them. Let them do what they want to do at this point. That kind of thing. So I would not worry about that. What if it will be too painful for my children? Well, the divorce was too painful for the children, right? Usually itself. So now you're trying to make things right. It's a healing process here. So it's a way to bring peace, not pain. And sometimes you may have to go through a little more pain to achieve the healing and the peace that you're really seeking. My former spouse was abusive to me, so won't my annulment be? There's no such thing as an automatic annulment. Okay, there has to be the impediments that we discussed. Again, just because the guy went off the deep end after 30 years of marriage is not grounds for an annulment. You have to look at, were there seeds of that there all along that maybe you failed to see? That's what it would have to be. If I'm divorced, I'm automatically excommunicated. It's like, no. Again, it's not divorce. We don't know that word. We don't understand that word. It's divorce and remarriage without the annulment. And that's the problem. My first marriage was not in the Catholic Church, so it does not count. Yes, it does. Right? We take marriage, everybody's marriage, very, 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 very seriously. Why? Because Jesus took it very, 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 very seriously. And so, yes, we take your marriage. It does count. Okay? That's really, for those curious, you could read it on your own. I put a little discussion, I didn't intend to cover it here, on what they call the exception clause. What did Jesus mean when he said, way back in the beginning here, everyone who divorces his wife except on the grounds of sexual or immorality makes her committed. That's called the exception clause. What may he have meant there? That's for your own reading pleasure. There are 3 popular thoughts by scripture scholars what he could have meant. All of them have pros and cons, so you read them if you want. Questions that I didn't cover?
Well, this is more about my marriage specifically. Would I have a sacramental marriage?
Jonathan was baptized, right?
Yeah, he was baptized.
Of course.
Okay.
And you were baptized.
What?
Good question. You were married before. That's right.
But I wasn't.
That's right. So before you were baptized, your marriage was not a sacramental marriage. But the moment you got baptized, it became a sacramental marriage.
That makes my baptism even more special.
And we never gave her a wedding cake after her baptism.
Well, he owes her one now. We owe her one now, too.
Yeah, I have to call John and be like, hey, you're a few months late, but you actually
We'll get you a
an
cake.
Anniversary present.
We'll get you a cake.
That's so sweet.
We like sweets, as you can tell. Would a Dunkin' Donuts wedding cake be accepted?
Anything.
Bring them a donut.
I love Eclair donuts. You know the Eclair donuts?
Yeah, tell me.
Oh, those are the the best ones. I love those.
Oh, I love those too. And Napoleons, they're good too.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see my problem there. You see I love the Napoleons and eclairs and all that sort of thing. Yeah, if anybody, well, if any, I thought, I didn't know how many people were coming. And I know that there's privacy issues here. So instead of having a sign-up sheet like we normally do, I brought 3x5 cards. If you want to pursue an annulment, put down your contact information and put down who you want to speak with, either me or Father Sebastian. Some people like to speak with the pastor, or if you want to speak with me. So
Father Sebastian read ahead and said that they could either see the priest or the deacon, and that's what he left.
That's not far from the truth, I'm sure. No.
The deacon do
Pass these around. Hold on, we don't think we need to pass.
Yeah, I don't think we.
Not something, right?
I did with index cards what I do with everything.
I'm not gonna give you one.
I don't need one.
You don't need one.
I was gonna pass it along. I just came in because I'm curious.
I remember
like to learn things.
a long time ago, long before I was ordained even, there was an information session on annulments just like this, and it was advertised in the same way, those who also would just like to learn more about it. And so I walked in, and the priest that was running it, he looked at me, he goes, "Henry, I don't care what you have to say. You and Carol are stuck with each other for the rest of your life."
I told John this morning, I was like, oh, they're having a class on annulments, and I was going to go. And then he goes, oh. And then I went, I just want to learn about what the church teaches. I said, because they're going to talk about what the church says marriage is and what it is not, and I want to learn all that stuff. And he goes, oh, well, I hope you have fun. I said, I'm not divorcing you. And he goes, that's good. And he kisses my forehead and he goes to church.
Predict flowers on your kitchen table.
I was going to be like, hey, are we good?
Nice piece of jewelry.
But I was like, yeah, I'm doing this thing. And he was like, okay, are we okay?
Knowledge is very important for our faith, and that's why our regular OCIA classes are important even for Catholics.
That's right.
You were kind of sort of obligated to seek knowledge.
We actually are. That's even St. Thomas Aquinas says that. You're still culpable if you're capable of knowing about what to do and you refuse to know it for whatever reason. I don't feel like going out tonight. There's the example that's often used is somebody in times of slavery, and you hear there's an abolitionist coming to town, and you're not sure what you feel, and you say, well, there's a TV show tonight I want to watch. I'm not going to go hear what he has to say. You're culpable of any sin that you commit for your failure to educate yourself. The only time you would lessen the culpability is to say, well, I'd love to go, but I've got a sick family member that I have to care for, be a provider for, and I can't go. That's a different story. But yeah, we are obligated to educate ourselves in the faith. Not knowing, it's like Andy could tell us, that ignorance is no excuse of the law. That's also true of the church.
Ignorance is not bliss.
The Catholic school is great, but there's many things they could not bring up in grade school.
That's right.
It would not be age appropriate.
That's right.
And even in high school, there are many subjects.
That's right.
So you need adult education so that the stuff you never could talk about when you were a kid, you can now discuss.
Like I mentioned, when I would speak at St. Francis High School, even to their freshman class, now this is a Catholic high school here in town, right? The kids would come up with questions that, you would not believe, how old are you? You're talking about all this perverted sexual behavior, they would come up and, it's okay if I do it that way, right? No, it's not, they're talking about all sorts of strange acts of, sexual activity and so forth. I said, look, if you're unmarried, and even if you're married, if a man puts his penis in anything other than the vagina of his wife, he is committing grave sin and jeopardizing his eternal salvation. And they would look at me like, oh, this guy is speaking I didn't expect them to hear that, Oh, these are kids. These are little kids, and they know the most deviant, perverted stuff you could imagine.
The internet not watching your TV.
Oh.
And movies.
And, they're acting like, look at this old fart, we're gonna educate him, Not that I know anything, but I know what's wrong and I know what's right.
Knowledge is no longer required.
Knowledge is no longer required. All right, are there any questions then, or?
Or it's okay to do unless you get caught.
That's right. We've lost the sense of sin. Sin is no longer sin. And this is where, if we read scripture, this is where ancient civilizations came crashing down, because not only did they sin, they failed to even see it as sin. They just did what they wanted to do, and God said, okay, enough is enough.
When you have a church leader who says, well, who am I to judge? Then you have problems.
That's right. That's right. And then a media who takes that so out of context as well.
Right.
Confusion.
He wasn't talking about homosexuality in general. If you look at that conversation that led to that statement, he was talking about one priest who was suspected of being a homosexual, but no hard evidence about it, just a thought. And he said, I just know the guy, he's a good priest, who am I to judge? None of that got reported. Only that sentence came on t-shirts, who am I to judge, and applied to everybody.
But confusion and ambiguity has been the hallmark of this papacy, unfortunately.
Yes.
And it's not inadvertent ambiguity and confusion.
It's intentional. It's intentional.
Well, that's exactly what they're talking about in Amendment 4, that the Catholic Church is so opposed to.
That's right.
It's because they're making it sound like nothing, when it's unbelievably in favor of killing.
Yeah.
They're almost making like, a live birth is the sin now.
Infanticide. It's okay.
Does anyone need any extra copy? Got plenty, but anybody? Everybody has it.
I'll take an extra.
Sure.
It's online if you want to send it to your friends.
Yeah, I'd like to take an
I have to do it.
Sure.
Great.
Oh, I'm glad you got it. Yeah.
So
That means you're probably getting the bulletin online now.
I get all the little notifications.
But everything's been submitted. As far as
I got mine last year. But I was given such wrong information where I was told I had to go through the long form. I had to spend 2 years of torture going through the long form because it's so painful to do, and then all of a sudden, oh no, you didn't need to do this, your lack of form. He's the one that's got to do long form.
I'd like to put in a minute before we return about anyone who's here for whatever reason to learn about annulment. We encourage you to attend all of our OCIA classes. They're really fantastic. Deacon Henry is a
How long do they last?
2 hours, 9 to 11.
But how many
They
sessions?
start August 25th, and they go through March or April or May or so. They get through Easter, but I can tell you, I taught RCA for 6 years, and I've been coming to Deacon Henry's class for about 5 or 6 years. And it's incredible. I never fail to learn something incredibly new, and it kind of blows my mind. And
What day is it on?
it's on
It's in between our two masses.
from 9 to
From 9 to 11. And you don't have to attend
Put what you want in that
every
box,
one,
that one's empty.
because one class is
You'll
not
see the schedule online, so
prerequisite
you
to
can
the
see,
next
well, I
one.
really want to go to this one, or I really want to go to that one. So you can pick and choose, but.
I like your tote bag there.
Do you love it? I got it.
Do you see that, Carol?
I did, I love it.
Oh, very
That's
nice.
beautiful. I used to have a purse that I always brought to church and stuff, and then I was like, this bag is so much better, and I keep a band